welcome to this month's edition of Fintech Firebrand. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research, and I'm here to chat to you about all of the seasonal finreg and fintech news. Now, one of the top stories of this month, the ongoing saga of FTX and its ongoing impact on the crypto markets and beyond, for that matter. We've seen a couple of very significant moves by the regulators to talk about who is going to be in charge of regulating the sector in the most part. The SEC has been stuck between a rock and a hard place to some extent, between being accused of over-regulating the sector and also under-regulating the sector by various parties. So interesting to see that it actually was not in charge of regulating FTX or FTX US. That was in fact the CFTC. So Rostin Benham from the CFTC has already gone in front of the Agriculture Committee to talk about the lessons learned in FTX, and Gensler's also facing a lot of regulatory questions too from the House Financial Services Committee, to whom he reports. And next week we're also going to have a very interesting session with the House Financial Services Committee as SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, the mastermind, some might say, behind the FTX fraud has been asked to go in front of the House Financial Services Committee. Now, obviously, he's not going to be in there in person if he turns up at all, but will be probably dialing in remotely if he does at all, from the Bahamas, where he's currently holed up. He has been on the circuit, the speaking circuit, unusually for somebody that has been accused of fraud over the last few months. Or the last few weeks, I should say. It feels like months. He has been talking about what his perspective is of what happened to FTX. Obviously, there are some significant questions that need to be asked about how his use of client funds, the relationships between all the different entities that FTX had. So expect this to be an ongoing saga. Whether he faces criminal proceedings or not, it is expected he will do. Much like Bernie Madoff with the Ponzi scheme there. So I think there are some really interesting similarities. There are also some interesting differences with crypto and the ongoing impacts on, if you see the collapse of BlockFi, and I don't think that's going to be the only one. So keep a very close eye on this space going into 2023. Another big FinReg topic with regulators in Europe has been the post-Brexit deluge of things that have happened. The UK is attempting to set itself apart in a bid to reclaim London's role as a fintech hub and a financial services hub, for that matter, in Europe. Its crown has slipped on the trading front, so much has moved to other locations, including the US and Asia, as I previously mentioned in previous episodes. But certainly some of its discussions have been about rewinding key pieces of regulation. Now, up for debate at the moment is whether the senior managers and certification regime may be rewound, which is actually the UK is one of the only jurisdictions alongside Ireland and one of the Asian regulators as well. I think it's Japan that has a similar regime, and Australia in the Asia Pacific region, with regards to holding senior managers directly accountable for infractions. So rewinding this piece of regulation is an interesting choice. I'm not sure it's advisable given the current market environment and the need for compliance to be taken much more seriously. I'm not sure it's something that the FCA would welcome, but certainly the UK government is talking about it. So the interesting dynamic between the UK government and the regulators is ongoing. There was a lot of debate, as I probably previously mentioned, about regulators facing opposition from politicians and having politicians having much more control over regulation. That was actually voted out, so that's great. We haven't had that come into force, but certainly there is a lot of tension between the two camps. So going forward, that will be interesting in that dynamic. In mainland Europe, on the other hand, ESMA has just produced its report about how some of the national competent authorities across the other jurisdictions dealt with Brexit. And now there was some strong words said about the need for much more clarity, consistency across the regulators in how many people are located in European EU domiciled jurisdictions versus those that are based in the UK. If there's if there's an entity that's been registered, to bring it into compliance with the Brexit changes. So apparently a couple of the regulators have not been as consistent as they could be with other regulators. Best practices are fast evolving in this space. Now there's also the discussion about clearing, euro clearing, and whether that should be forcibly moved from the UK over to other jurisdictions. And there's been a lot of industry toing and froing on this topic because it would be very damaging to the market potentially. So the EU regulators up until this point have not taken drastic actions, but it seems to be coming to a tipping point. And again, it's being tabled as something that should be done or discussed heavily in the new year. And as we know, with regards to regulation, much of the compliance is after the event, when the stable door has been open for a little while, let me put it that way. And we've had lots of different infractions and enforcement actions being taken by the FCA over the last couple of weeks, many of which are related to market abuse. We've seen some brokers banned, individuals banned, often for things that happened in 2016 or 2018. So it's a little after the fact, but certainly it's important to see these enforcement actions being taken and that insider trading or market manipulation is being addressed in this manner. A little quicker off the mark has been the SEC on that front, and we've seen, and the CFTC as well, we've seen a huge number of enforcement actions being taken over the last few weeks, albeit not always in the crypto space. Actually in the TradFi space has also been an area of focus, and certainly something we expect to see before the Christmas period, a lot more activity on that front. Another topic that is often discussed on these episodes is ESG, and a slightly sad piece of news this month that Vanguard has decided that it will be stepping out of the Climate Alliance and its commitment to the Net Zero project that it had signed up to as part of the asset management community alongside a lot of its peers. Now, obviously, that doesn't affect its, I guess, the offerings it has with regards to offering ESG products to its clients, ESG funds. Likely, obviously, there's still demand, but it's also it is a sad thing to see because at the entity level, these asset managers have been, up until this point, at least visibly have been claiming to be moving towards net zero by a certain point in 2050, so which is not very near, but certainly we would like to see much more activity on that front. Climate risk is a hugely important thing to the next generation of investors and all of us, to be fair. So I was sad to see that happen this month. Hopefully no other large asset managers will take the same route, but it is indicative of some of the political pressures that are being enforced by some of the politicians, some of the large corporates on a lot of these asset managers. So interesting to see that dynamic and how that transforms into the next year, especially as we head into a recession and everything becomes even more politicized than it is now. So certainly something to monitor in 2023. And now my final thoughts for the month. I have been spending a lot of time talking to various ops teams on the topic of CSDR and CSDR enforcement. Obviously, that came into force earlier in the year, in February. It has been somewhat disappointing, a bit of a damp squib from the perspective of the regulators, and it doesn't seem to have driven down settlement failures as much as it should have. Now, I may have spoken about this earlier in the year, but certainly there is a lot of reevaluation going on at the part of the EU level regulators at the moment to assess what action needs to be taken next to actually force firms to spend more in this area to rectify some of the underlying problems that are resulting in trade failures or settlement failures, I should say, not trade failures. Important distinction there. But I think the actions that could be taken or are likely on the table for the next year or so will be CSD exclusions, so firms being excluded from settling on a CSD for a certain period of time, naming and shaming, which would be the settlement Krampus naughty list that I mentioned when I was speaking in Amsterdam the other month. And we were sort of picking the same topic later in Finland when I was at another event. And also there's the prospect of actually putting up the financial penalties, so they're even higher and they're more convincing for firms. Now, I don't know whether any of those or the combination of those will be effective. Certainly, it's something to bear in mind, given we're already seeing large penalties being paid out. The operational complexity of dealing with lots of small penalties is also a big challenge. And that's a topic I've been talking to clients and contacts about over the last few months as well, in terms of the number of penalties that are under €5 that are flying about all over the place, and institutional investors, asset managers, brokers, and global custodians are all coming into conflict with each other in certain instances about how to resolve these debits and credits. Especially if it's something that's under €5 that will actually cost you more to settle the penalty than it would, because of the cross-border charges if it's a cross-border issue. So certainly there are lots of things to see in the next 12 months from the EU level regulators, but also from the markets. How better can we tackle these things? I know that some initiatives are out there, the SWIFT Unique Transaction Identifier, or UTI, which is the most painful acronym out there, but it's certainly dealing with a painful problem. That's an initiative there. There are numerous other fintechs focused on this space in terms of improving workflow and communication. So one to watch from the fintech perspective as well. And before I finish for the month, I would love to say and wish you all a Merry Christmas if you celebrate it, and if not, a happy holiday season. Please do get some rest and relaxation over the break and make sure you're well rested for a potentially very, very busy 2023. And thanks for all your support. Fintech Firebrand could not exist without you, and Firebrand Research certainly could not exist without your input. So thank you very much, and happy holidays.